The twin suns of the Kepler system rose slowly over the golden wheat fields of New Eden, casting long shadows across the most peaceful human colony in the frontier territories of Space Commander. Elena Vasquez stood on the porch of her small farmhouse, a cup of coffee warming her weathered hands as she watched the morning light spread across the land she had helped build over 15 years ago. She was 63 years old now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life spent first in war and then in the quiet work of growing something beautiful from nothing behind her. The screen door creaked open and a small voice called out to her, "Grandma, I cannot find my school bag anywhere." Elena turned and smiled at her granddaughter Mia, a bright-eyed girl of 8 years, with messy brown curls and a gap-toothed grin that could melt the coldest heart in the galaxy. "Did you check under your bed, little one?" Elena asked, setting down her coffee. "I checked everywhere." Mia insisted with the dramatic urgency that only children possess. Elena chuckled and walked inside, finding the missing bag exactly where she expected it to be, stuffed behind the couch where Mia had thrown it the previous afternoon. "What would you do without me?" Elena teased, handing the bag to her granddaughter. "I would probably live in chaos forever," Mia replied seriously, repeating a phrase she had heard her grandmother say many times before. The transport horn sounded in the distance, and Mia grabbed her bag and ran for the door. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, my little star. Learn something wonderful today." Elena watched from the porch as Mia sprinted down the dirt road toward the transport station, where dozens of other children were gathering, their laughter and shouts filling the morning air with the sounds of innocent joy. The New Eden Academy sat 3 kilometers from the main settlement, a sprawling campus of white buildings surrounded by gardens and playgrounds that served the 3,000 children who called this colony home. It was the pride of New Eden, built by parents who wanted their children to have every opportunity, even on the edge of known space. Elena had helped design it herself during her first years as colony administrator. Back when she still believed the universe was a place where good things could grow if you worked hard enough to plant them, she had no way of knowing that in the cold darkness between stars, something was watching. The Vulketh Dominion had observed humanity for decades with the patient calculation of a species that viewed the universe as a mathematical problem to be solved. They were insectoid beings, their bodies covered in hard black chitin, their eyes compound orbs that saw the world in fragments, their minds connected to a vast hive consciousness ruled by the overman to the Vulketh. Emotions were inefficiencies, love was a weakness, mercy was a flaw, and attachment to offspring was a primitive instinct that more evolved species should have abandoned. Long ago, High Commander Zorveth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the endless calculation studying the holographic display of the human colony below. He had been given a simple mission by the Overmind: secure this strategically valuable planet and acquire the human colonists as a labor force for Vulketh mining operations. The humans were known throughout the galaxy as adequate workers, physically versatile and surprisingly durable despite their soft flesh and emotional nature. "High Commander," one of his subordinates clicked. "Our scans show 12,000 humans on the surface, including approximately 3,000 juveniles concentrated in a single structure. Juveniles are inefficient labor," Zorveth responded, his mandibles clacking with dismissive certainty. "But they will serve as motivation for the adults to comply. Begin the descent." 20 Vulketh dropships broke through the atmosphere of New Eden just as the morning lessons were beginning at the academy. Elena was in her office reviewing crop reports when the first explosions shook the ground and the emergency sirens began to wail. She grabbed the old plasma pistol she kept in her desk drawer, a relic from her military days that she had hoped never to use again, and ran outside to find chaos erupting across the settlement. Soldiers poured from their ships, their weapons cutting down anyone who resisted. Their harsh clicking language filling the air with sounds that seemed to come from nightmares. But the people of New Eden were not the soft targets the Vulketh expected. These were frontier colonists, men and women who had carved a life from nothing on an alien world. And many of them were veterans like Elena, who had seen combat before. They fought back with farming tools and hunting rifles and bare fists. Refusing to surrender even as the odds turned hopeless, Elena rallied a group of defenders near the town center, her old training returning to her muscles like a remembered song. "We need to get to the academy," she shouted over the sounds of battle. "The children. We have to protect the children." But even as she spoke, she saw more Vulketh ships descending. Toward the white buildings in the distance were 3,000 young lives. Huddled in fear, High Commander Zorveth watched the battle unfold with growing irritation. These humans were fighting far harder than his intelligence reports had suggested, and the operation was falling behind schedule. His casualties were mounting, and the Overmind did not tolerate failure. "The adults are proving difficult," his tactical officer reported. "Their resistance is costing us significant resources." Zorveth considered the situation with cold logic. The juveniles were useless as laborers and were clearly the motivation behind the adults' fierce resistance. If he removed that motivation, the humans would break it with simple mathematics. "Deploy chemical agents to the juvenile facility," he ordered without hesitation. "Remove the inefficiency, High Commander. The juveniles number nearly 3,000. Eliminating them will reduce our potential labor acquisition significantly. The adults will be easier to control once their emotional attachments are severed," Zorveth replied. "This is the optimal solution. Execute the order." The gas was colorless and odorless, designed to shut down mammalian respiratory systems within seconds. It flooded through the ventilation systems of the New Eden Academy at exactly 9:17 in the morning. Local time, in classroom after classroom, children who had been learning mathematics and history and science suddenly found they could not breathe. Teachers tried desperately to help their students, dying alongside them as the poison filled their lungs. Little Mia Vasquez was sitting in her third-grade classroom, working on a drawing of her grandmother's farmhouse. When the gas reached her, she had just enough time to feel confused. Before the darkness took her, she was 8 years old. 2,847 children died in less than 3 minutes. Elena was still fighting her way toward the academy when she saw the Vulketh ships lifting away from the school. Their mission apparently complete. Something cold seized her heart. A terrible knowledge that she could not yet name but could feel in her bones. She broke through the Vulketh lines with a desperate charge that cost the lives of half her group, running toward the academy, even as enemy fire scorched the ground around her. When she finally reached the building and forced open the doors, she found silence. Row after row of small bodies lay slumped over their desks, their faces peaceful, their eyes closed, their futures erased in an instant by beings who saw them as nothing more than numbers on a tactical display. Elena walked through the halls like a ghost, her mind unable to process what her eyes were seeing. She found Mia in her classroom, still holding the crayon she had been using to color the roof of a farmhouse. Elena gathered her granddaughters, small body in her arms, and screamed. It was a sound that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives, the raw, broken howl of a grandmother holding her dead grandchild, a sound that contained all the grief and rage that a human heart could hold outside. The Vulketh completed their conquest of the colony, rounding up the surviving adults for transport to labor camps. But before the communications array was destroyed, one of the colonists managed to send a transmission to Earth. It contained a single image: rows of children still sitting at their desks, taken from them forever by an enemy who did not understand what they had done. That Image traveled across the stars at the speed of light, reaching every human world, every human ship, every human heart, and in the silence that followed, something changed, something that the Vulketh, in all their cold calculations, had never thought to factor into their equations. They had hurt human children. They had no idea what was coming. The image reached Earth in 14 hours, traveling across the vast emptiness of space to arrive on screens and holographic displays across every continent of humanity's homeworld. People stopped in the streets and stared at their devices, unable to look away from the photograph that showed rows of small bodies slumped over classroom desks. Children who would never grow up, never fall in love, never have children of their own. For a long moment, the entire human species seemed to hold its breath, and then came the silence. The Galactic Council expected an immediate response, a furious transmission demanding justice, a call for emergency sanctions, perhaps even a declaration of limited war against the Vulketh Dominion instead. They received nothing. No diplomatic protests were filed. No angry speeches were broadcast. No demands for reparations were made. The human ambassadors simply left their posts and returned to Earth without explanation, leaving empty chairs in council chambers across the galaxy. High Commander Zorvith received reports of this silence and felt what passed for satisfaction in his species. The humans have been broken, he reported, to the overmind through their psychic connection. The demonstration of our superiority has achieved the desired psychological effect. They recognize that resistance is futile. Continue observations, the overmind responded. But this matter appears resolved. Redirect resources to other expansion priorities. Zorvith was pleased. The operation had been costly, but ultimately successful, and his standing within the Dominion hierarchy would rise as a result. He had no way of knowing how catastrophically wrong his assessment was on Earth. Something unprecedented was happening. The United Nations convened an emergency session that included every national leader, every military commander, and every voice that mattered in human governance. They gathered not to debate or negotiate or compromise. They gathered to agree. The Children's Accord was drafted, voted upon, and signed within 6 hours, making it the fastest unanimous international agreement in human history. Every nation on Earth pledged total economic and military cooperation until the threat to humanity's children had been permanently eliminated. There was no opposition, no dissent, no political maneuvering when the vote was called. Every hand rose together in the shipyards orbiting Earth and Mars and the outer colonies. Workers who had been operating single shifts suddenly found themselves joined by second and third cruise factories that built civilian transports were converted to produce warships overnight. Retirement waivers were signed by thousands of veterans who walked back into recruitment centers with cold determination in their eyes. Admiral Marcus Cole was summoned to the newly established Human Defense Command and given a single order: build a fleet, the Unified Council told him. And when it is ready, make sure this never happens again. Cole was 58 years old, a decorated officer who had lost his own son to a pirate raid 12 years earlier. He understood loss in a way that few commanders did. And he understood what was being asked of him. How far do you want me to go? He asked. As far as necessary, came the reply. The Admiral nodded once and set to work. Meanwhile, the galaxy watched humanity's silence with growing unease. The Allery Collective, a species of tall, graceful beings who had long considered themselves humanity's closest allies, sent their senior diplomat to Earth to offer condolences and counselor. Thalami had worked with humans for 30 years and considered herself an expert on their psychology. She expected to find a planet in mourning, a people broken by grief, perhaps seeking comfort from their allies in this dark hour, What she found instead made her blood run cold. The streets were quiet but not empty, filled with people moving with purpose and determination rather than despair. Factories belched smoke into the sky around the clock. Their fires never dimming. The military academies were processing new recruits at 10 times their normal capacity, graduating officers in weeks rather than years. Thelami requested a meeting with Ambassador David Chun, one of the few human diplomats who had remained at his post. She found him in his office, staring at a holographic display showing fleet production numbers that climbed higher with each passing hour. "Ambassador Chen," she said softly, "I came to offer the condolences of the Alari Collective. We grieve with you for the children of New Eden." Chun turned to look at her, and Thelami felt a chill run down her spine. His eyes were not red from weeping. They were cold and focused, like the eyes of a predator that had finally spotted its prey. "Thank you, Counselor," he said, his voice flat and controlled. "Your sympathy is noted. The Council is concerned about the lack of human response," Thelami continued carefully. "Some fear that humanity has been too traumatized to act, while others worry that something else is happening. I must ask, Ambassador, what is humanity planning?" Chen was silent for a long moment before he answered. "We are going to kill them all, Counselor, every single one." Thelami's graceful features twisted with shock. "Ambassador? Surely you cannot mean the Vulketh number in the billions. And the Galactic Council has protocols for addressing conflicts between species. Genocide is forbidden by every law and treaty that governs civilized space. The Vulketh killed nearly 3,000 children." Chum replied, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "They gassed them in their classrooms like vermin to be exterminated. You speak to me of laws and treaties. But I ask you, Counselor, where were those laws when our children were dying?" He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below, where the lights of 1,000 factories blazed against the night. "The Vulketh believe we are weak because we love our children. They think our emotions make us soft, controllable, easy to break. They are about to learn how wrong they are." Thelami left Earth 3 days later, her diplomatic shuttle carrying her back to Lalaurie space with a warning that she knew the Council needed to hear. "The humans are not grieving," she reported to her government. "They are preparing. I have never seen anything like it. Their entire species has united behind a single purpose, with a focus that defies everything we thought we knew about them." "What purpose?" the Alari Council asked. "Extinction," Thelami replied. "They intend to erase the Vulketh from existence, and I do not believe anything in the galaxy can stop them." Back on Earth, Admiral Cole stood before the growing fleet that would soon darken the skies of Vulketh worlds. The first Retribution fleet, they called it, and its ranks swelled with each passing day. Volunteers came from every corner of human space, soldiers and civilians, young and old, people who had never held a weapon and veterans who had hoped never to hold one again. They came because somewhere in the stars, children had been murdered, and something deep in the human soul demanded an answering. The labor camps where the surviving colonists of New Eden had been taken. Elena Vasquez worked alongside her fellow prisoners under the watchful eyes of Vulketh guards. She did not speak, did not resist, did not draw attention to herself, but every night, when the guards were not watching, she whispered the same words to the darkness. "They are coming. Just hold on a little longer." Because they are coming? She did not know when or how, but she knew it in her bones with a certainty that defied logic. Humanity would not let this stand. The silence was not surrender. It was the quiet before the storm, the held breath before the scream, the moment of perfect stillness before the universe itself was shaken to its core. And when that storm finally broke, the galaxy would learn a lesson it would never forget. You do not hurt human children. You do not touch what humanity loves and expect to survive. The Vulketh had made their choice. And now they would face the consequences in the cold void between stars. 400 warships were taking shape, crewed by humans who had traded their grief for something far more dangerous. They had traded it for purpose, and their purpose was total, absolute, and utterly without mercy. The countdown to extinction had begun. 6 months after the massacre at New Eden, the first Retribution fleet crossed into Vulketh space. 400 warships moved through the darkness like a wave of steel and fire, carrying 50,000 soldiers who had volunteered to deliver humanity's answer to the murder of its children. Admiral Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Remembrance, watching the tactical display as his fleet approached the first target. He had spent months studying Vulketh biology, society, and military doctrine, searching for the most efficient way to accomplish his mission. The answer he found was both simple and terrible. The Vulketh reproduced through massive spawning events that could only occur on worlds with very specific atmospheric and gravitational conditions in their entire dominion of over 100 colonized planets. There were only 7 worlds capable of supporting spawning. Without those 7 worlds, the Vulketh could not produce offspring without offspring. They would be extinct within a single generation. Cole had named his strategy the Total Species Annihilation Protocol. And today it would begin. Admiral, his communications officer, reported, "We are receiving a transmission from Vulketh Command. They are demanding to know our intentions and warning us that any hostile action will be met with overwhelming force. Open a channel." Cole replied. The holographic display shifted to show High Commander Zorvith, the same officer who had ordered the deaths of the children on New Eden. Cole had memorized his face from the intelligence reports, had studied every decision he had made, had traced every order he had given. "Human Commander," Zorvith clicked, his compound eyes gleaming with what might have been contempt. "You have violated sovereign Vulketh space. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." "I am Admiral Marcus Cole of the Human Defense Force," Cole responded, his voice steady and cold. 6 months ago, you killed 2,847 children on the colony of New Eden. I am here to deliver the consequences. Those juveniles were a tactical liability," Zorvith replied dismissively. "Their elimination was a logical military decision. If you have come seeking vengeance for such an insignificant loss, you will find only your own destruction." Cole smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You killed our children, High Commander. You thought it would break us, but instead you have united us in a way nothing else ever could. Your spawning worlds burn today, and your species dies with them." The channel closed, and Cole turned to his tactical officer. "Execute Operation Cradle. Fire. All task forces are cleared to engage." The first Retribution fleet split into 7 strike groups, each one targeting a different spawning world simultaneously. Vulketh had fortified their military installations and fleet staging areas, expecting humans to follow conventional war doctrine. They had not considered that humanity might ignore military targets entirely and strike at something far more precious. The first spawning world to fall was Vulketh Mire, a humid jungle planet where billions of larvae developed in vast underground nurseries. The human strike force emerged from hyperspace directly above the planet, catching the defensive fleet off guard. The battle lasted 4 hours, and it was brutal. Human ships died in flashes of fire and metal, their crews giving their lives to clear a path for the bombers that followed. When the defensive fleet was finally shattered, the bombers descended and released their payloads, not explosives, but atmospheric dispersal weapons, carrying engineered compounds that would render the planet permanently uninhabitable for Vulketh biology. The nurseries died within days, billions of larvae choking on air that could no longer sustain them. Similar scenes played out across all 7 spawning worlds. At Vulketh Prime's secondary spawning moon, A desperate Vulketh counterattack destroyed 30 human ships before being overwhelmed. The spawning world of Kethver. The human task force commander sacrificed her own flagship to block a Vulketh escape route, ensuring that no larvae could be evacuated. The losses were staggering by the end of the first week. Humanity had lost 87 ships and nearly 15,000 soldiers, but they did not stop. Did not hesitate, did not consider retreat every time a spawning world fell. Another nail was driven into the coffin of the Vulketh species. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from across Vulketh space species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in horror at what they were witnessing. This is genocide, the Thrall ambassador declared, his tentacles writhing with agitation. The humans are committing systematic extinction. This cannot be allowed to stand. And what do you propose we do? Councillor Thalami of the Ellery asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Send our fleets against theirs. We have seen what human determination looks like. Do any of you truly wish to stand between them and their vengeance? The Vulketh must be protected, another ambassador insisted, regardless of what they did. No species deserves extinction. Tell that to the children of New Eden. A quiet voice said from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Ambassador David Chung, who had returned to the council for the first time since the massacre. Tell that to the parents who will never hold their sons and daughters again, he continued, stepping forward into the light. Tell that to the teachers who died trying to shield their students. And tell that to the grandmother who found her granddaughter dead at her desk with a crayon still in her hand. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each ambassador in turn. You speak of protection and laws and treaties. But where was your protection when our children were dying? Where were your laws when the Vulketh decided that human lives were acceptable losses in their calculations of efficiency? Two wrongs do not make a right, the Thrall ambassador protested. No, Chun agreed. But we are not seeking to be right. We are seeking to ensure that this never happens again to any human child, anywhere in this galaxy. And the only way to guarantee that is to make an example so terrible that no species will ever consider harming our children again. He paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. You can condemn us, sanction us, even try to stop us. But ask yourselves this. If it were your children who had been murdered, your nurseries that had been gassed, your future that had been stolen, would you show mercy to those who took everything from you? The chamber fell silent, and no one had an answer as the weeks passed. The Vulketh Dominion crumbled. Their military, designed to fight conventional wars, could not adapt to an enemy that ignored strategic targets and struck only at their ability to reproduce. High Commander Zorvith attempted to negotiate a surrender, offering to hand over military assets and pay reparations in exchange for peace. Admiral Cole's response was broadcast across every frequency. You taught us that children are valid military targets. We learned. One by one, the spawning worlds fell silent. Their capacity to create new life destroyed forever. Velth colonies that could not spawn began to surrender, their populations facing a future without children. The Dominion, which had stood for thousands of years, was dying in a matter of months across the galaxy. Other species watched with a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. The Kreth hierarchy, who had been planning their own expansion into human territory, quietly abandoned their invasion plans. The Morvith Collective, who had considered humans a minor nuisance, began treating human diplomats with newfound respect. Even the ancient Vorn Empire, which had existed for 10,000 years and considered itself above concern for younger species, took notice. The humans are more dangerous than we calculated, the Vorn Empress noted to her advisors. Their emotions were always dismissed as weaknesses, but it appears we misunderstood. Their love is not weakness. It is fuel for a fire that can burn worlds. in the labor camps of New Eden. Elena Vasquez and the other survivors heard rumors of what was happening. Guards, who had once been cruel and dismissive, became nervous, and uncertain supplies that had once been abundant became scarce as Vulketh resources were redirected to the failing war effort. And then, one morning, the guards simply disappeared. A human rescue shuttle descended from the sky, carrying soldiers in the uniform of the first Retribution fleet. Elena walked out of the camp she had been imprisoned in for 6 months, looked up at the smoke rising from distant Vulketh positions, and felt tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am," a young lieutenant said, approaching her with obvious respect. "We've been looking for you. Admiral Cole requests your presence on the flagship." "Why?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse from months of silence. "Because we're almost done, ma'am," the lieutenant replied. "And the Admiral says the decision about what happens next should be made by someone who was there, by someone who lost everything." Elena looked toward the sky, where human warships patrolled like guardian angels over a world that had seen so much death. Somewhere up there, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance, and humanity was asking her to help decide it. 1 year after the massacre at New Eden, the Vulketh Dominion existed in name only. Their mighty fleets had been scattered and destroyed, their spawning worlds rendered barren wastelands where no new life would ever emerge. Their colonies surrendered or abandoned as the infrastructure of their civilization collapsed around them. Conservative estimates placed the Vulketh death toll at 3.2 billion soldiers, workers, administrators, and the countless larvae who had died when the spawning worlds fell. It was the most devastating military campaign in galactic history, conducted with a precision and ruthlessness that terrified every species that witnessed it. And now, only one world remained, Velth Prime, the ancient homeworld where their species had first evolved and where the Overmind itself resided, stood as the final bastion of a dying race. 200 million Vulketh had crowded onto the planet, refugees from 100 fallen colonies who had nowhere else to go. They had fortified every inch of their world, built defensive platforms in orbit, mined the approaches with enough explosives to destroy a dozen fleets. They knew the humans were coming, and they intended to make their last stand as costly as possible. Admiral Marcus Cole studied the holographic display of Vulketh Prime from the Bridge of the Remembrance, calculating the price of the final assault. "The defensive network is extensive," his tactical officer reported. "Our projections estimate we would lose between 30 and 50 ships in the initial approach, with additional casualties during the orbital bombardment phase. And if we simply blockade and wait for them to starve?" Cole asked. "Their food reserves could sustain the current population for approximately 18 months. But civil unrest would likely cause significant casualties before then. They might sue for peace to avoid complete annihilation." Cole nodded slowly, considering his options. The fleet had the firepower to reduce Vulketh Prime to molten glass within hours. But such an action would cost human lives as well. He was tired of losing good soldiers to a species that had already proven it had no aura. Soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to the bridge, and Cole turned to see Commander Elena Vasquez standing at the doorway. She looked older than she had in the intelligence photos, her hair completely gray now, her eyes carrying a weight that would never fully lift, but there was steel in her spine and clarity in her gaze. And Cole understood why the council had wanted her here. "Commander Vasquez," he said, rising from his chair. "Welcome aboard. I wish we could have met under better circumstances." "Admiral," Elena replied, her voice quiet but steady. "I understand you wanted my input on the final phase of the operation. I did. You were there when it started, and I believe you should have a voice in how it ends." He gestured to the tactical display, where Vulketh Prime hung like a blue-green jewel against the darkness of space. "We have the capability to destroy them completely. Every ship, every installation, Every living being on that planet. It would take approximately 6 hours from the moment I give the order. Elena stared at the display, a jaw tight. And the alternative? We could accept a surrender, impose restrictions on their spaceflight capability, establish permanent monitoring stations to ensure they never threaten human space again. They would survive, but their power would be broken forever. You're asking me whether we should commit genocide, Elena said flatly. I'm asking you what justice looks like, Cole replied. Because I honestly don't know anymore. I've spent a year killing billions of beings in the name of our children. And every night I see their faces in my dreams. Not the Vulketh faces, but the faces of every human soldier who died under my command. I need to know if it was worth it. And I need to know when we stop. Elena walked to the observation window and looked out at the planet below, somewhere down there. Vulketh larvae huddled in nursery chambers, unaware that death hung above them in the form of human warships. They were innocent, just as the children of New Eden had been innocent. I found my granddaughter with a crayon in her hand, Elena said softly. She was drawing a picture of our farmhouse when they gassed her classroom. She was 8 years old, Admiral. She wanted to be an artist when she grew up. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to continue. For months, I dreamed of this moment. I dreamed of watching their world burn, of making them feel even a fraction of the pain they caused us. I thought vengeance would fill the hole in my heart where Mia used to live. She turned to face Cole, and he saw tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. But it won't. Will it? Killing their children won't bring back ours. Destroying their future won't restore what they took from us. It will just make us into the same monsters they were. Before Cole could respond, the communications officer interrupted. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's High Commander Zorvith. He's requesting to speak with whoever is in command. Cole and Elena exchanged glances, and then the Admiral nodded. Put him through. The holographic display shifted to show Zorvith, the architect of the New Eden massacre. He looked diminished somehow, his chitin dull and cracked, his compound eyes clouded with what might have been exhaustion or despair. Human commanders, he clicked, his voice carrying a tone none of them had heard from a Vulketh before. Humility. I request permission to speak. Speak, Cole said coldly. I have watched my species die over the past year. I have seen spawning worlds burn, colonies fall, and billions of my kind perish because of a decision I made. A decision I believed was logical and efficient. He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. I was wrong. I did not understand what I was doing when I ordered the deaths of your young. I saw them only as numbers, as variables in an equation to be eliminated. I did not comprehend that to you. Each one was a universe unto themselves. Understanding comes too late, Elena said, stepping forward to face the display. It doesn't bring them back. No, Zorvith agreed. It does not, but I offer myself to you, human commander. My life, my confession, my public execution if you desire it. In exchange, I ask only that you spare my people, especially the young ones who had no part in my crimes. You think your life is worth 200 million of your kind? Cole asked. No, my life is worth nothing. It should have ended the moment I gave that order. But I hope that my death might purchase something that my species desperately needs. The chance for our young to grow up in a galaxy where they might someday atone for what we have done. Elena stared at the broken commander who had murdered her granddaughter, and she felt something shift inside her. She had expected to feel rage, to want to tear him apart with her bare hands. Instead, she felt only a vast, hollow sadness. You finally understand, she said quietly. You finally understand what you took from us. I understand that I destroyed something precious, Zorvith replied. Something that can never be replaced or forgiven. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only ask that the innocent among us be given the chance to learn from our failure." The transmission ended, leaving Elena and Cole alone with the weight of the decision before them. What do we do? Cole asked. Elena looked out at Vulketh Prime, at the world that held the last hope of a species that had done something unforgivable. She thought about Mia, about the children of New Eden, about all the humans who had died in the years since, and she thought about what kind of people they would become if they crossed this final line. "Bring him here," she finally said. "Bring Zorvith to this ship, and let me look into his eyes when I decide the fate of his species." Cole nodded and began giving orders to arrange the transport in the space between worlds. The future of the Vulketh hung by a thread, and one grieving grandmother held the knife that would either cut it or tie it back together. The shuttle carrying High Commander Zorvith docked with the Remembrance under the watchful guns of a dozen escort fighters. He was led through the corridors of the human flagship in chains designed to restrain beings far stronger than himself. Surrounded by guards whose eyes burned with barely contained hatred, every human he passed had lost someone in this war, a friend, a family member, a comrade, and every one of them wanted him dead, but they had been given orders. And so they escorted him in silence to the observation deck where Elena Vasquez and Admiral Cole waited. Zorvith was forced to his knees before them, his compound eyes taking in the two humans who held the fate of his species in their hands through the massive windows behind them. Vulketh Prime hung in the void, beautiful and fragile and utterly defenseless. "High Commander Zorvith," Cole said formally, "you stand accused of ordering the murder of 2,847 human children on the colony of New Eden. Do you deny this charge?" "I do not deny it," Zorvith replied, his voice steady despite his position. "I gave the order. And I bear full responsibility for what followed." "Then you understand that the sentence for such a crime can only be death." "I understand, and I accept it." Elena stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. She stopped directly in front of the kneeling Vulketh and looked down at the being who had taken everything from her. "You murdered my granddaughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Mia. She was 8 years old, and she loved to draw pictures of our farmhouse. "Do you remember her?" Zorvith's mandibles clicked softly. "I did not know their names. To me, they were simply numbers. Variables to be eliminated in pursuit of tactical objectives. I did not see them as children with lives and dreams and futures. But you see them now? I have spent the past year watching my own species die, watching our spawning worlds burn, watching larvae who had committed no crimes perish because of decisions made by those who came before them. Yes, I see them now. I see all of them, and I will carry their faces with me into whatever darkness awaits me." Elena was silent for a long moment, her hands trembling at her sides. Every fiber of her being wanted to hate this creature, wanted to watch him suffer the way her granddaughter had suffered, wanted to make him feel even a fraction of the pain that had consumed her since that terrible morning. But when she looked into his compound eyes, she saw something she had not expected. She saw understanding. She saw regret. She saw a being who had finally learned, far too late, that the universe was not made of numbers and equations, but of lives and loves and losses that could never be calculated. "You were wrong about us," Elena said. "You thought our love for our children made us weak. But it was never weakness. It was the source of our strength. The reason we kept fighting when others would have surrendered. The fire that burned your dominion to ashes." "I know that now," Zorvith replied. "And I know that no apology can undo what I did." Elena crouched down to meet his eyes directly, her face only inches from his. "When I found Mia in that classroom, I wanted to burn your entire species to nothing. I wanted to make you feel the same emptiness that I felt, the same loss that tore my heart in two." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "But my granddaughter was not a being of hate. She was kind and gentle and full of love for everything in the universe. If she could see me now, about to order the deaths of millions of innocents, she would be ashamed of what I have become. Elena stood and turned to face the window, looking out at Vulketh Prime. "I will not let my grief turn me into you," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I will not murder children because their elders made terrible decisions. That is what you did. And I refuse to be like you." She turned back to face Zorvith, and when she spoke again, her words carried the weight of final judgment. "The Vulketh will live." A murmur ran through the guards assembled in the chamber, some of shock and others of barely suppressed anger. But Elena raised her hand for silence. "You will live. But you will remember, every generation of your kind will be taught what happened here. They will learn that humanity could have destroyed you completely and chose not to, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Not because we forgave you, but because we refused to become you." She looked at Admiral Cole, who nodded slowly in agreement. "Zorvith will be publicly executed on the steps of the Galactic Council, broadcast to every world in known space. The rest of the Vulketh will be stripped of spaceflight capability and confined to their homeworld. Under permanent human oversight, you will have the chance to rebuild, to grow, to become something better than what you were. But you will do it knowing that you exist only because one grieving grandmother chose mercy over vengeance." Zorvith lowered his head, his mandibles clicking with what might have been gratitude or sorrow, or both. "It is more than we deserve." "Yes," Elena agreed. It is 3 weeks later. The execution of High Commander Zorvith was broadcast across the galaxy. He walked to his death without resistance. His final words a confession of his crimes and a plea for his people to learn from the horrors he had caused when it was over. The Galactic Council ratified the Treaty of New Eden, which placed the Vulketh homeworld under permanent human supervision and stripped them of all military capability for the next 300 years. The other species watched these proceedings with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The Kreth ambassador privately admitted that his people had been planning an invasion of human space before the war. Those plans were now permanently abandoned. The Morvith Collective proposed a formal alliance with humanity, eager to be on friendly terms with a species capable of such devastating retribution. Even the ancient Vorn Empire sent a diplomatic envoy to Earth for the first time in 5,000 years. "We underestimated your kind," the Vorn ambassador told the Human Council. "We saw your emotions as flaws to be exploited, your love for your children as a weakness to be used against you. We understand now that we were profoundly wrong. You are not weak. You are simply different from us, and that difference makes you far more dangerous than we ever imagined." Years passed, and the galaxy settled into a new order where humanity was no longer seen as a soft, emotional species easily pushed aside. They were respected, even feared, but not hated, because in the end, they had shown something that few species ever demonstrated in times of war. They had shown mercy on the rebuilt colony of New Eden. A memorial garden grew where the academy had once stood. 2,847 trees stood in perfect rows, one for each child who had died on that terrible morning. Galena Vasquez, now 80 years old, spent most of her days there. Sitting beneath the tree she had planted for Mia, sometimes other colonists would join her. Parents who had lost children, siblings who had lost brothers and sisters, friends who had lost the futures they had imagined together. They would sit in the shade of the memorial trees and tell stories about those they had lost, keeping their memories alive in a garden that would grow for centuries. On one such afternoon, a group of children from the new colony school gathered around Elena, their young faces full of curiosity. "Is it true you were there when it happened?" a small boy asked, his eyes wide. "Yes," Elena replied softly. "I was there. And you're the one who saved the Vulketh from being destroyed?" Elena looked up at the sky, where human patrol ships drifted silently among the clouds. "I didn't save them," she said after a long pause. "I saved us. I saved us from becoming the very thing we were fighting against." She looked down at the children gathered around her and smiled, seeing echoes of Mia in their innocent faces. "Remember this, little ones. There is nothing more powerful than love, and nothing more dangerous than those who would harm the ones we love. But true strength is not just knowing when to fight. It is knowing when to stop." Above the memorial garden, the twin suns of the Kepler system began to set, casting long golden shadows across the rows of trees somewhere in the stars. Vulketh children were learning about the humans who had spared them, and somewhere in the garden, the spirit of a little girl who had loved to draw pictures of farmhouses smiled at a grandmother who had chosen to honor her memory with mercy instead of hate. The universe was vast and often cruel, but in this small corner of it, something beautiful had been allowed to grow because that was what humans did. They loved, and they protected, and when all seemed lost, they found the strength to be better than their enemies. It was their greatest weakness and their greatest strength, and the galaxy would never forget it.